You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today we're going to be talking about when you should listen to your husband. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head-on. Hi, Miriam Susan here. Today we're going to be talking about when you should listen to your husband. Now, I will admit that the title of this podcast was designed to invoke your curiosity so that you would listen about the times when you should listen to your husband. Now, this podcast is not going to explain to you the one and only time that you should listen to your husband. Obviously, if you have a good relationship with your husband, you're going to be listening to him more than just in this one specific time. But I wanted to pick out a point in my history with my husband and talk about a time when I did not listen to him. And I want to clarify what I mean by that. And that is, I did not listen to my husband when he would tell me that he had a feeling that his parents, specifically his mom, would try to turn our kids against us. Now, this is something that my husband had, I don't know if you would say a premonition, because that's kind of a weird word, but he just kind of knew that at some point in our lives, his mom would do something to try to turn our kids against us. And he said he had this sense or this feeling before he was dating age, before my husband and I met, before he went to college, many, many years before we ever had children. So I wanted to kind of explore that with you and what that might mean if your husband has a rocky relationship with his parents. Probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't. And if he just has a sense that there's going to be a time in the future when these children of ours are going to be targets of whoever your toxic in-law is, and they're going to try to turn your children against you. Now, I don't really know exactly what prompted my husband to feel this way, except experience. So he saw many, many times in his childhood, and I don't know all of the instances, but he saw a pattern. And we've talked about patterns before in previous episodes of this podcast, and how patterns can give us clues. Patterns should be something that we are looking out for because they can point us to some problematic, toxic, unhealthy, different kinds of behavior. My husband grew up in a family that took in foster children. In fact, through my husband's childhood, I think his parents hosted, something like 20 or 30 different foster children through the years. Some of them were very short-lived. Some of them were just for, a week or so. Some of them were for many years. And he saw things happening in the dynamics with his mom and different social workers in regards to these foster children's parents that gave him some concern. And even as a very young child, or even as a teenager, he saw things and the way his mom handled things when it came to what was really in the best interest of his mom versus maybe what was in the best interest of the child and the family were at odds. And I don't have any specific examples that I really want to share publicly, but there were times when my husband felt like his mom was directly undermining the birth parents, the actual parents of the foster children, and not really considering that this child had a chance to go back to their parents. And I know some of the situations that brought certain children into their foster home were very tragic and very abusive and definitely warranted the situation that the children were then in. But as we know, not every system is perfect. Not every system works the way that it is intended to work. And sometimes children, unfortunately, fall between the cracks and end up in this foster care system when perhaps there was another way. There was another way to help this family outside of removing the children from the home. I'm not going to debate the foster care system. I don't have any personal experience with it. I only have anecdotal experience that I've heard from my husband's experience growing up hosting children as a foster home. But the things that he saw his mom doing were very concerning to him. And all throughout our marriage, every once in a while, it depended on what was going on at the time. But there were times peppered throughout our married life when he would throw that out there. And he would say, I'm really concerned that one day when our kids get older, my mom is going to sit down with one of our kids and tell them her side of the story, paint us as the bad guy, and turn our kids against us. And me, not fully understanding the dynamic of the relationship, not understanding how a toxic mind works, I didn't really believe him. I didn't not believe him, but it just seemed so outside of my understanding. It was so far outside of my scope of reality that I couldn't imagine that actually coming to pass. I'm telling you this because a lot of times there will be moments when we just have a feeling about something. Some people might call it your intuition. I like to think it's the Holy Spirit kind of working on our hearts, working on our minds, when we just have a sense that something is going to happen. And it's not this, psychic fortune teller kind of thing. I think it has more to do with just really being able to put together patterns in our brains that our conscious mind might not necessarily be able to do. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for having a sense for when things are off. And we try to use logic to explain things away. And that's what I did, is I thought, well, they don't show any signs of doing that right now. They really seem to love the kids. They like to do things with them, and we seem to have a pretty okay relationship. Why on earth would I believe that at some point in the future, things would be any different than they are at that point and change to where my kids are being turned against me? So it didn't make logical sense for me to necessarily believe what my husband was saying. I thought maybe he's just overly concerned. Maybe he's just a little bit paranoid. I don't remember exactly what I thought when he told me these things, but I remember thinking, okay, this is not going to happen. And then you can probably guess the end of the story. An attempt was made to turn our children against us. And I can look back through the years of our kids' childhoods and see moments where seeds were planted. And the tricky thing about somebody who tends to have maybe more covert personality styles that kind of fly under the radar, there's not anything specific you can pinpoint that's really, really bad, but just little things that plant the seed that I got your back, but maybe your mom doesn't. Your mommy doesn't want you to have fun. Your mommy won't let you come over and spend the night. Your mommy won't let you have ice cream for dinner on Sundays. Your mommy won't let you have these toys at your house, so I'll have to keep them here at my house. Lots of little things that looking back, were seeds that were being planted so that at some point in the future, they could be watered and nurtured and grow into what could have been our children being turned against us. So what should you do if your husband is bringing up things like this and you really don't see it going that way? You really can't imagine any point in the future where whatever your husband's saying could come to fruition? I want to encourage you to suspend some logic just for a moment and trust your husband. Listen to what he's saying. Let it hold some credibility in your mind. If your husband is bringing up a concern that he has for your children, especially in the realm of being turned against you, he may not be able to give you hard evidence. He may not have a laundry list of examples of ways that he has seen your in-laws doing certain things to your children, because chances are they're going to be very sneaky about it. They're not going to be outright and bold and overt about it, although they could be. There are plenty of examples of people who overtly will badmouth their daughters-in-law right in front of their children, but maybe yours are more covert and sneaky, and they are doing things just under your radar and you can't pick them up. And so if your husband is saying things like, I think at some point in the future, my parents are going to try to turn our kids against us, believe him. Believe him. And one of the things you can do is say, okay, honey, what do you think we should do about it? Ask him that question. If he's feeling a certain way, if he's bringing up a certain concern, turn around and ask him a question. What do you think we should do about it? Is there anything you would like to change? Is there anything that you've seen that is concerning? And then you both work together to try to find a solution that works for both of you. Now, if he is unsure about what to do, that's fine. Just let it go. Let him know that you hear him and that you will give some credence to what he is saying, that you understand that this is a concern for him, and then keep your guard up. Look out for things. Look out for little ways that maybe they use your brothers and sisters-in-law to undermine your authority. Look at ways when they try to spend a lot of alone time with your children. I'm not saying all alone time with grandparents is bad, not at all. But if there seems to be a concerted effort just for alone time with the kids, especially if it's an extended period of time and you're a little bit hesitant, listen to that. Listen to that hesitancy and think, okay, is this what my husband is talking about? Now, it wouldn't be out of the question to think that, yes, what my husband has said could come true. There are stories. There are families who have had a rocky relationship with the grandparents, and the grandparents have seized opportunities to turn their grandchildren against the grandchildren's parents. This has happened. When I bring up our situation with people that I don't know very well, there is always some hesitancy because I don't know how they're going to take it. I don't know if they're going to believe me because our story sounds pretty unbelievable. And I was sharing this with a lady, and she immediately got it. She said, I get it. I understand. I understand about you wanting to keep things as private as possible. I get it. Because, and then she shared a story of when she and her husband were going to seminary at a Baptist seminary, I think in Tennessee. And one of the couples that were also seminarians at this seminary had I think the mom's parents watch their two older children while they went to the town to look for a place to live, to look for jobs, to basically try to get settled in. And that turned into, well, this is where they're from. Why don't we just keep them here and they can go to school here while you focus on seminary and just keep the baby with you? And so they did. And of course, nobody knows exactly what transpired between the families, but the parents of the children decided that they were going to go and get their kids back, and they wanted to reunite and be a whole family again. And when they went to go pick up their children, they were gone. The mom's parents and their children had disappeared. And this was a missing persons case for decades. For decades. Long story short, what happened was the grandparents kidnapped their grandchildren, moved from Tennessee to California, and basically took on new names for the whole family. The grandma and grandpa had new names. The kids had new names. And they started a totally new life in California. It was like 20 years later. One of the favorite spots that the grandfather used to go to was a diner, and he was talking about this story just kind of in passing with one of his friends in California. And his friend thought, this is really weird. And the friend contacted authorities, and they found the kids. The kids were then adults, and the most heartbreaking thing is that the kids didn't want to reunite with their parents because they had not known them. Who knows what kind of lies that they were told by their grandparents about why they had to leave? Nobody knows. The grandmother had passed away. It was just the grandfather. And at the time that he was arrested, he was showing signs of dementia and memory loss. So the mystery of why the kids were taken is lost forever. But you still have this case where there's parents who literally had their children stolen from them and turned against them. And now that the parents have found the children, the end of the story that I was able to find online was that the children, who were adults at the time that they were found, were not really wanting to get back in touch with their parents. That's the worst case scenario outside of something tragic happening to your children. But as a parent, I can't imagine that kind of heartache, not knowing where my children are and then finding them and finding out that they had been poisoned against me. That's a nightmare. This family is probably still continuing to live in this nightmare. They've lost their children twice. Once because they were kidnapped, and now a second time because they were turned against them. Now, I hope and pray that there is a happy ending to the story, that at some point the children were able to develop a relationship with their parents, but they were young children. They were elementary school age. I think they were 5 and 7. So at such a critical point, their lives were shattered. They were removed from ever seeing their parents and fed who knows what kind of lies. And now the relationship between them and their parents is broken. The parents can never get those years back. The children can't ever get those years back. And that's what I don't want to happen to any of us listening to this podcast. Because as much as we want to see the best in other people, and I do think that is an extremely important quality to have, especially as a Catholic, as a Christian, to look for the good in other people, sometimes we have to not use that as a way to ignore and downplay the bad behavior that we are seeing. So, to wrap up this crazy episode, I want to encourage you to please listen to your husband. When he says things that might not make logical sense to you about what he can imagine or has had a sense that could happen to your family, believe him. Listen to him. Honor what he's saying. He's not coming up with these things, chances are, just off the top of his head. These are not random thoughts. Now, our husbands might have issues that could cause them to, imagine things that aren't there. I'm not talking about that. That's something very different. This is your husband recognizing patterns that he has seen throughout his childhood, seen throughout his life, seeing now in your children, and being concerned. Listen to your husbands. Husbands, I pray that you can use this episode as a tool to talk to your wives and let them know I don't have any logical explanation for why I'm feeling this way. But please just trust me. Just trust me. Believe me. If your husband is wrong and you are a bit more cautious with your in-laws than you would have normally been, I don't see that as a bad thing. If you take some time to really look and observe patterns of behavior in your in-laws and your husband ends up being wrong, then so be it. I think it would be much safer for you and your children if you do err on the side of caution when it comes to anything like this that your husband might bring up. So I hope this episode is a good talking point for you and your husband to discuss any concerns that he might have. And again, please validate his thoughts and concerns. Let him know that you trust him and that you believe him. Don't downplay what he says. If he is genuinely concerned about something with his parents, believe him. Believe him. I sincerely wish that I had paid more attention and believed my husband when he said these things to me so many years ago, because I never ever imagined that what he was saying could possibly come to light. But the last interaction our family had with my in-laws, my husband witnessed it in our kitchen. I was knocked out. I was having an adrenal crash. I was out of it, but my husband saw it, and that was the final straw. Don't let it get to that point with your family. So if your husband has some kind of inkling that something is a little off, trust him. God bless you. I hope that you never face this situation, ever. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. I have a free gift for you that I would love for you to get. It is my free scripts for toxic in-laws. It's a little PDF that you can use to give you some examples of how to speak to your in-laws about certain issues. I'd love to give it to you absolutely free. So if you head to desiringpeace.com/gift, it will be there waiting for you. Just enter your name and email so you can start using it for inspiration on how to talk with your toxic in-laws. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. Go to desiringpeace.com/gift to claim your gift now. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.